All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hokyoji's Sunday morning Dharma talk. This morning we have as our speaker Marc Anderson, who has been practicing meditation for over 40 years. He is a Buddhist priest and chaplain at Macalester College. He is also an internationally known professional percussionist, a poet, the founder of the Urban Monk Project, and he has for years taught people of all ages how to open to their creativity. His training includes Loch Kelly's non-dual mindfulness and awareness, nonviolent communication, and a BA in Cultural Anthropology. Thank you, Marc, for joining us this morning. We look forward to your talk.
Thank you. It's really good to see you all. Nice to be here. I'm hoping, my intent is to string some observations and thoughts together, but not try to wrap up the package too tightly so that we can leave some room for some conversation about the topic, and the topic is belonging. So, belonging is often characterized as a universal human need, like a psychological imperative akin to our basic physical needs. And to use a nonviolent communication sort of framework of analysis, the feelings that are accompanied when this need is met include security, acceptance, inclusion, and connectedness. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from a really lovely book called The Evolved Nest. It's a book on the need and the kind of universal need of all beings to be nourished, nurtured, taken care of, raised in particular ways. So here's a little excerpt. From the moment we are born, we are wired for connection. We seek the faces of our caregivers, the warmth of a body, and the safety of being seen and held. These attachments are not optional. They're essential for survival. And now from a slightly different section. Nestedness is not just for children. We become fully human by owning up to being animal, a creature of the earth, tuning our animal senses to the sensible terrain, blending our skin with the rain-rippled surface of rivers, mingling our ears with the thunder and the thrumming of frogs, and our eyes with the molten gray sky. Feeling the polyrhythmic pulse of this place, this huge windswept body of water and stone, this vexed being in whose flesh we're entangled. Becoming earth, becoming animal, we can all re-nest and reconnect ourselves and our communities with animal kin and the heritage of nature-based living, where we fit into the peace of nature, the wild, and embrace our place in this planetary community. And now a little Hongzhi, the great Chan master. In this one, Taigen Dan Leighton titled as Spectacular Images of Clouds and Dragons. In the wind abode, clouds and dragons harmoniously follow each other. Very naturally from the first, they do not need to express their intentions to each other. Similarly, patch-robed monks are accommodating and based on causes and conditions can harmoniously practice together. Arriving without display, emerging unconcealed, the wondrous clouds and dragons enter the whole scene and cannot be confused. Casually hanging above the 10,000 features, each distinctly presents a spectacular image, complete without a hair's difference between them. Springing forth with spontaneity, they clearly exemplify coming home, but still must investigate until they have eaten their fill. Clouds disperse and the winds die down. The autumn sky clears and the moon sets. The waters of heaven are limitless. Where the ground is on its own, the brightness begins to be realized. And one of the lines that stood out for me, that sort of ties it together with the earlier little excerpt about nesting and our need for it, is from the first, they don't need to express their intentions to each other. It's unspoken. So it has me wondering, socially, do we actually understand belonging this way? In our society, in our families, in our communities, and that includes, Buddhist communities, all of the various kind of intersecting communities that we belong to. To belong, the word itself, the root verb, is traced to Old English and Middle English origins. Be, an intensive prefix that intensifies the meaning of the word it's attached to. So the being, the be part of it, intensifies the following. Longin, the original word, Middle English verb, meaning to go, to be suitable, or to belong. Or langin, the Old English verb, which means to pertain to suit, or to go along with. And then another aspect of it is gelang, an earlier Old English word meaning at hand, together with, or dependent on. So the common usage of this word implies an inclusion. And we tend to think that that inclusion is somehow earned or bestowed. It's not, I don't think that we tend to think of it as innate, although I'm raising that as a question. And or it implies some kind of ownership pertaining to things. And that kind of ownership, sadly, includes humans. I mean, we even say that about each other, about our partners and about our children. They belong to me somehow, or I belong to them. Somehow in there's an othering or objectification inherent in the way we've come to think about belonging. So I think the Buddhist view, in its most realized form, presents a different view of that. So I think Buddhism, fundamentally, and from a Buddhist point of view, belonging is our interconnectedness. I think the Buddha's insight was that he and everyone else intrinsically belongs. He and the earth together awoke. So there seems to be kind of a tension between how we've come to think about belonging and how it's understood not only in Buddhism but other mystical wisdom traditions, and also I think really in indigenous worldviews. So here's a few articulations of this from a Buddhist point of view. So here's Dongshan's philosophy of not relying on others. It emphasizes achieving self-reliance, spiritual independence by not seeking validation externally. Dongshan said, "Do not seek from another, or you'll be estranged from yourself. I know go on alone, finding I meet it everywhere. One should understand in this way to merge with suchness as it is." So those of us, if you get ordained, we actually use the term home leaving. So there's a way in which it's not belonging in a typical sense. It's actually leaving behind certain ways of seeing the world and going out on our own. So Hongzhi, one of the primary teaching methods reflected in Hongzhi's frequent encouragement that practitioners embody the teaching with independence, illuminating fully on their own. Here's a little section from Hongzhi. A person of the way fundamentally does not dwell anywhere. The white clouds are fascinated with the green mountain's foundation. The bright moon cherishes being carried along with the flowing water. The clouds part and the mountain appears. The moon sets and the water is cool. Each bit of autumn contains vast interpenetration without bounds. So some of you may have checked it out. I'm only 3 episodes in, but there's a TV series now called Pluribus. And I don't want to give too much away in case it's something you want to check out, but the premise is essentially that somehow, I won't describe how, but somehow almost everybody in the world, save for really like a handful of people around the world, everybody else in the world has come to see themselves as a unified entity. And in fact, everyone has access to what in Buddhism we think of as like storehouse consciousness. So anything that anybody has ever known as a human being, that information and the skills that go along with it, interestingly enough, are available to any human being. And the messages are just conveyed because everybody's the same mind. Except for, there's a few people who it didn't happen to. And so the premise, at least so far, I don't know where they're going to go with it, but is this tension between, and the thing about the people that have this unified mind is they all now have a biological imperative for compassion. Like it's revolting to them, and other things happen as well when there's kind of conflict and violence. So, like obvious parallels to like kind of the Buddhist ideal. And the tension, the drama in the series is there are these people, and one in particular, the protagonist, who isn't a member, is outside, who doesn't belong. And they don't want to belong, actually, because their view is that then they would give up their integrity as an individual. That's kind of an oxymoron, but that they would lose their uniqueness, they would lose their individuality, and that's what really being a human is about. And in our own practice and in the wisdom that's been handed down to us, we can see, like in the harmony of difference and sameness, it's articulated that sameness is not the thing. Like glimpsing emptiness, to see that there actually is a world before our concepts, before we've named everything, before we've broken things up. And to see that and to know the feeling of its completeness, its boundlessness, it's accompanied usually, maybe you could say often, I think, or always, by a sense of peace and calm. But that's not the whole thing. So, if you kind of think through, depending on how you sort of develop a cosmology around these kinds of experiences, but if you kind of think of awareness as undifferentiated, like pure awareness as undifferentiated, which is the experience of glimpsing emptiness, somehow, for some reason, like awareness, and this gets into kind of speculation, but somehow awareness is aware of difference, and difference is how we sort of create forms, or that's how forms arise. And it's only through forms, this kind of relationality of forms, that we then kind of circle back and become aware of emptiness, to see that emptiness is underneath, or part of, emptiness is form is emptiness, that they actually need each other, so that the dynamic tension is the dynamic tension of creativity. And we keep creating new forms so that there are new ways to be in relationship to. And actually there's some really interesting neuroscience now around that very topic. So here's a little more, so along the same line, in Shito's practice, there's also the seeking of transcendent attachment to our experiential realization of the ultimate. As he says, in the harmony of difference and sameness, I usually think of it, but referred to as equality here. According with sameness is still not enlightenment. The goal of Shitu's practice, as of Hongzhi's, is the full integration of deep experiential awareness of the ultimate source, with our particular functioning amid worldly phenomena, referred to as being in the world but not of it. So from the beginning we have the clear, wondrously bright field, but it's through many lifetimes of misunderstanding this relationship, at least according to Hongzhi, that comes from distrust, hindrance, and screens of confusion that we create a scenario of isolation. So here's a poem from William Stafford. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So, what I'm trying to sort of illuminate is this tension between the relative world that we live in and then this the wisdom that's been handed down. And again, I think not just through Buddhism, but for me, Buddhism is the best map. But it's pointed to in lots of different ways that we are also experiencing this way of being alive in which we already belong, that there's no real price of admission for it. So I'm going to read another little excerpt from the Evolved Nest. Growing one's potential takes connectedness and a holistic becoming. Maslow made an attempt to describe wholeness. His path to awareness gives us some insight. Maslow was transformed after spending a summer with the Blackfoot tribe. He was astonished at what he found. Tribe members were what he described as ego-secure. They felt at home in a benevolent psychological world, which is the opposite of being neurotic. Instead of neurosis, he found a common personality of dignity and friendliness and containing little insecurity, suspicion, envy, jealousy, antagonism, and hostility or anxiety. Instead, the tribe members displayed feelings of being liked and loved, the perception of the world as a warm and friendly place, a tendency to expect good to happen, feelings of calm, ease, and relaxation, self-acceptance, a desire for adequacy with respect to problems rather than for power over people, social interests, cooperativeness, kindliness, interest in others, and sympathy. Impressed by the tribe members' psychological health, Maslow shifted his scholarly emphasis to growing full potential. He was similarly influenced by the actualization orientation of the Blackfoot, who did not emphasize the self in actualization, but rather the individual's gift to the community. Each person fit and belonged and was secure. Each person was valued, welcome, protected, included, taught to give back, and provided the opportunity to become actualized. For the Blackfoot, actualization was the foundation of becoming human, not the last achievement in a human life. To truly raise a child, then, would be to bring that child to his or her full potential as a human being. Animal children and children of human foraging communities do not learn how to live and thrive from books. They experience life fully from observing, imitating, and being guided by community members through play and engagement. They learn in embodiment with all their senses. This is another reason why it's important for children to learn about themselves in the mother of all, nature. So what really stands out to me about this is the pointing out how self-actualization can only be realized through community. And that's something that, through the history of Buddhism has been a problem that arises. At various different times, we've recognized that there's a potential for humans to see this as even though the teachings are explicitly contrary to this, we start to see it as a selfish project in a certain kind of way. So, really influential Buddhist writer and practitioner for me is Peter Hirschak. And he has a very interesting take on the story of Gisukatami. So many of you maybe will know the story of Gisukatami. She was a woman in the Buddha's time whose husband had been murdered, and then one of her children, I can't remember if it was her only child or not, but anyway, her child died. And she was so grief-stricken, and she just couldn't get over it. She carried the body of her dead child around with her. So finally somebody said, you should go talk to the Buddha. And the Buddha recommended that she go house to house in the village and collect a mustard seed from anybody who had not experienced loss. And, of course, everybody has experienced loss, and that's usually the way the story is interpreted, that the Buddha was trying to point out that it's this is part of life, and it's just something we have to learn to live with and accept, and there's some social support in that, but that's usually how it's interpreted. But Hirschak's interpretation was that he gave it to her as a practice that wove her back into the fabric of the community, understanding that when we become traumatized in that way, it happens both physically, but psychologically and physically, we extricate ourselves from the community. We not only feel alone, but we start to act alone, and we withdraw, and then if you're in a withdrawn state, then the sort of kind of skewed logic that follows is that the only way to kind of save yourself is a personal endeavor. And so Hirschak's view, and it's related to his view of Chan and Chinese Buddhism, which he actually identifies as being has a more communal orientation than Indian Buddhism does. And so in Chan, that it doesn't make any sense that a person could be enlightened. It's a social action. Enlightenment is actually the activity of a community. It can only happen in relationship to things, which to me is completely consistent with Buddhist teaching, all of the Buddhist teachings, really. So I think this relates, I'm not too sure how, but relates to me anyway, the Dogen's well-known verse, to study the self is to forget the self. To study the self fully, one has to be intact psychologically and emotionally. So to forget the self, you can't just skip over knowing what the self is. You have to be a whole person. So as the evolved nest is trying to point out, like, it's not optional that we be nurtured and that we feel secure in this kind of relative sense. So to forget the self is to be verified, then be verified by the world. So it, again, is not it's not an individualistic kind of activity. One way you can describe the experience, or how it is that so-called individual appears in the world in a liberated form, is that we begin to appear without the constraints of priors. So learning how to accommodate and integrate this experience of the world prior to concepts, prior to names, this world that's already complete, that's vast, that is the root and seat of all creativity. To be liberated is to be able to access that while still operating in the relative world, still operating in a world that has names, and there's me, and there's you, and there's the tree. So it's be able to operate without the constraint of priors, to be free from the problem-solving predictive mind and arrive in a moment spontaneously and creatively. Free to use those priors at will, but not to be beholding to them or belonging to them, which is, I think, where belonging goes awry for us, is that what we start to think, and societally, and I think it's been happening for a long time, what we think we need to belong to is actually our ideas, because we're authentically, there is a sense that we can feel like we don't belong, like, no matter, I mean, the Buddha felt that way. It was his quest. Like, he felt alienated somehow. He recognized the suffering of being a human, and felt disconnected. He didn't feel like he belonged, and he searched. So that's what set him on his search. But so socially, I think we just get confused. There's also a book called that I'm reading now, called Goliath, the Goliath Curse, and it's about societal collapse. And in there's a long list of cases of societal collapse. The author is arguing that the contributing factors to societal, one of the contributing factors in most cases, maybe all, to societal collapse is the marginalization and oppression of groups. So they're denied their sense of belonging. That's how a hierarchy works. Like, there can't be a hierarchy unless one group of people is somehow diminished and doesn't have access to something that another group of people has. So that's the definition of hierarchy, basically. So when people are denied their sense of belonging, to be made to feel like they're less than, it actually has the effect of intensifying their need to belong. But then what happens is, and the way that it's imposed on people, is that they are forced to swear their allegiance. They're offered belonging by swearing their allegiance to whoever the elite group is. So eventually that's actually what unravels society. And clearly he's making a case that it's happening now, that we're actually experiencing that now. And you can see in the short history, a couple hundred years, that there's just intensified levels of stratification. The economic disparity is greater than it's ever been. We still other people by color of their skin or gender or sexual preference. There's countless ways that we other each other and then stratify ourselves. And then eventually that pressure becomes too much and societies fall apart. I also noticed it, I used to work with adolescents that were that were in trouble. I worked in different situations, but one I worked for a while with young men that were they were still minors, but they were in the legal system because they'd robbed a place or done something, but they were too young to go to jail, and they were trying to keep them in school. So it was basically a place that was run by the St. Paul School District and the Ramsey County legal system. And what I began to understand, and because they were so stubborn and so difficult, and I did lots of things with them, but it was mostly around drumming. And I had seen that drumming was so effective at sort of cutting through and connecting people, but with them it was just like pulling teeth, and it was so hard to do, and they would disrupt it at every turn. As soon as it felt like we were all going to, like, oh yeah, we're actually going to play some music, or everybody's going to let their guard down for a minute and we're all going to be together, somebody would do something to interrupt the situation. And one of the things that I started to realize is that they couldn't be vulnerable enough to let go of their self-identity because they had been denied the opportunity to actually have one. So their short lives at that point had been mostly a life of not really feeling ever secure in any kind of an identity. So they were claiming the only one that they knew. And when somebody like me, I had they mostly were kids of color. Disadvantage for me was I was a white dude coming in, so that didn't help. But I don't think it would have mattered that much. Anybody that was inviting them into basically, if you're going to have a sense of togetherness, what's required to belong that way is vulnerability. And they had never felt secure enough to be able to let go, because they had never had the opportunity to, in Dogen's words, to study the self. They had been denied having a self from the very beginning. And if you're denied having a self, your first project and your only project is going to be to claim a self. Psychological attunement is the main ingredient for empathetic understanding and optimal emotional and social development. Initially, it is the duet of attunement of infinite and care and carer, during which the infant's sense of self is seated and becomes known in a relational social world. So maybe the value of belonging in the relative biological sense is that it creates a stability, an environment for us to actually investigate what's actually happening, and then have the opportunity to see that there's actually nothing outside of belonging. That's all there is. Belonging is self-actualization. Belonging describes the realization that relationality is the fundamental fabric of the universe. It's the way that we used belonging in kind of a social relative sense, a skewed view that describes only our preferences for certain ways of being and our aversion to others. Aversion is disconnection. Acceptance is belonging. So I've come to think of and talk about sometimes meditation really as rewilding. So rewilding in the sense of letting go of all of our priors, all of the constraints, and experiencing the world as affordances unfolding to us. But in order to do that, we need to, in order to allow other people to do that, invite other people into it, we have to create environments in which that's going to be possible, or they aren't constantly in the battle of having to claim a self-identity. They have to have one. You have to have a self to be able to study the self, and to study the self is to let go of the self. So I'll end with another poem by William Stafford. The earth says, have a place. Be what that place requires. Hear the sounds the birds imply, and see as deep as ridges go behind each other. Some people call their scenery flat, their only picture framed by what they know. I think around them arise a riches and a loss too equal for their chart, but absolutely tall. The earth says every summer, have a ranch, that's minimum. One tree, one well, a landscape that proclaims a universe. A sermon of the hills, Hallelujah Mountain, highway guided by the way, the world is highway guided by the way the world is tilted. Reduplication of mirage, flat evening, a kind of ritual for the wavering. The earth says, where you live, wear the kind of color that your life is, gray shirt for me. And by listening with the same bowed head that sings, draw all into one song. Join the sparrow on the lawn and row that easy way. The rage without met by the wings within that guide you anywhere the wind blows. Listening, I think that's what the earth says. So, I thought maybe we could just open it up and see what came up for you around that, if anything. How do you know yourself in community? How do you think about community? Or not community, but belonging, but that could be community. Is community belonging? When do you feel like you belong? When do you feel like you don't belong?
I'll go. Thank you, Mark. There are a couple of things. So the first thing I will say that I would disagree with
Huh?
is it is exactly the opposite. It is we think we are in the world when we are of the world.
Mm.
So I would disagree with. Was that Hongzhi? I don't remember which. So that one I disagree with. The other one, so my original training was in economics and more specifically political economy. So I am a old school Marxist. And I can't help but think that, and this is certainly not original to me, that at the heart of a lot of our problems are probably the transactional nature of everything and even the idea of belonging. If you can leave, can you belong?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea of 50-50 and what do I get out of it just seems to completely and continually undermine the sense of belonging, especially when you talk about in your a lot of the examples of this belonging, looking at Maslow, were in hunter-gatherer or slightly more technologically, whatever, economically advanced societies. So that's kind of it's we're all searching for the belonging, but we want to leave if it gets bad.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's one of the main points in the Goliath curse is that one of his arguments really is to say that societal collapse isn't a good or a bad thing. Like sometimes it's just what's necessary, and one of the ways that sometimes it's a calamity, but often what happens is people just leave. Like they get sick of and tired of the situation, and they leave. And so one of the elements that has to be available for that to happen is there has to be an exit strategy. And I think one of the pressures right now is that because this transactional system has become so global that it's really hard to leave. Like it's really hard to extricate yourself from the system. And so that's an interesting tension. Yeah.
That's a really interesting thought when you talk about being able to exit and about societal collapse not necessarily being a good or bad thing. What it brought to mind for me was the thought of forest fires and how if you completely prevent them from happening, then you're going to have tremendous fires eventually. But if you allow the small fires to happen, like your exit strategy for the society, then there's room. So it felt like an interesting parallel. I loved your phrasing about meditation being rewilding. That's something that really resonates for me. And then finally, one thought that I had earlier was when you speak about growing up without a self, the first project, the overriding project becomes to claim a self. I think there can be another path there where the response becomes to deny the need for a self
Mm.
and to subjugate that and really to to subjugate the needs that you have to the needs of others in seeking a sense of safety.
Uh, could,
And I'm
could you say?
totally not speaking from personal experience, okay?
Uh, I'm wondering about that. I'm wondering if you could say more because it's bringing to mind somebody I know, somebody close to me, and actually, it's actually kind of a family pattern. We have
Yeah,
a in my family there's my family of origin. There's a enabler pattern,
yeah.
and is that what you're kind of referring to a little bit?
I think so. Yeah, you seek safety by serving others, by becoming needed and necessary. And you subjugate your own needs because those you don't feel secure enough to make any kind of demands upon anyone else.
Yeah, in my family, that sort of dynamic plays, comes and goes, but plays itself out, and so boundaries are weird in my family. And then if you actually claim a boundary, this has been my experience. When I got clearer about how it is that I was implicated in a system that seemed dysfunctional to me, often, not always, and claim some boundaries, it was an affront. Nobody was very happy. People took it in their own ways. Some people were, more upset about it than others. But that it wasn't met. It typically it wasn't hadn't hasn't been met well.
Thank you for your talk.
I'm wondering though, from what Shin A said about, um, subjugating the self to be able to find a sense of security and belonging in the group. It it could also point to that the next Buddha is the Sangha, and like, are we just limited because we live under imperialism and capitalism and patriarchy, and so we only have this trajectory towards an independent self, and and our psychological models tell us that, and that is my experience from my own trauma, but is maybe in thinking about other communities and a lot of our immigrant communities and BIPOC communities where the well-being of the group is really essential to the individual. And so maybe there is a wholesome path there. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And, admittedly, because of how I was raised, how we typically, I'm going to include all of us here, were raised to think of the world, our essential assumptions about the world are really oriented toward this individualistic sense. And then my best friend is from West Africa, and I can't remember. I think I wrote a paper or something. Well, I can't remember what it was, why I interviewed him. But anyway, I interviewed him about something, and one of the things that he said was that, now I know him, so I don't think it's completely true as a blanket statement, but his impulse when he makes a decision is not to think of himself first, but he actually thinks of the group, like whatever his family typically, but it kind of depends on what the decision might be about. But he actually thinks of the group first, like what is the impact on the group, and then from there considers what he needs. And so it's not that he denied that he had individual interests or needs, but that the first impulse was the group. And I actually saw him. One of my great stories about him was when we first met. We were both like in our late 20s, and we were both in school. I went to school late, and he had come here to do graduate work, and we had met at the U. And we were both like super poor and trying to raise kids. And I had parked my car. He lived in student housing, right? It was close to the state fairgrounds, and it was state fair time. And I could park in front of his house the rest of the year, but for 2 weeks you can't park in front. I couldn't park in front of his house, and I did. I didn't see the signs. I got towed. Didn't have any money. I came, I walked out. The car was gone. I came back into the front door, and I said, "Oh my God," I'm complaining about it. And his mom was visiting at the time. And she was standing there with him, and she spoke English. So she's listening to me. He's listening to me. She turned to him, said something in Ga, which I didn't understand. And then he turned and said, "I'll pay for it." And it was like, oh, I don't know anybody like you. Because there was no hesitation. Like there was no he didn't have the money. We were both poor. And I just thought, oh, you're not like me. I might have done the same thing, but I would have had to go through a different thought process. And it was just so clear for him, like his mother told him, first of all, that that's what was going to happen. And it was like, okay, this grown man, his mother told him, and he didn't have any reservation about it. And he just simply said that's what he was going to do. And it wasn't just an isolated incident. And then I got to, I've been around him now for 35 years, but that's how he is in the world. Like that's how he operates. And it became really clear to me that there's just a different orientation for him, that it really is the group first. Anybody else? I brought this topic up just because it just came up kind of, I don't remember how it came up. Anyway, I have this kind of training I'm trying to replicate in a slightly non-Buddhist way, although most of the stuff really ends up coming from Buddhism, but to give people that somehow aren't interested in going specifically through the Buddhist route a sort of deep dive, immersive experience with meditation and related kind of concepts and practices and ideas. And it came up in a discussion in one of those groups. And so it was interesting because there was one view was that, and it had to do with kind of, he was referring to like belonging in a family, and that belonging shouldn't require anything of you. That belonging you shouldn't have to behave in any particular way, and etc. that's what he felt like real belonging was. But then there were other views where it was like, no, belonging is participatory. Like you have to be part of, you have to be like contributing, not necessarily like, you don't necessarily have to toe, they weren't making the case that like you had to toe the line or pay allegiance, but that it was participatory, like you were a member of a group and that you belong through obligation in a way, which actually is consistent with my Ghanaian friend. That's how he sees the way that community and belonging works, which you obligate yourself to other people, and for him, and it's borne out in my experience, and I think it's where in this culture, this need, we talk about we need community, but people often are looking at community the way we look at the planet in this kind of extractionist sort of way. It's like, what can I get from the community? And they keep feeling like they're not in community because they can't get enough. And so this other view would be like, well, once you obligate, and it's not about what you get, but it's also about what you're giving, that's when community becomes realized.
Sorry, I wanted to add,
Yeah.
it's funny, well, because it does cut the other way. Like in Holland, it's like if you have your drapes closed during the day. So Holland is, the Netherlands is more collectivist than we are. But if you have your drapes closed during the day, people wonder what's wrong with you. Like no sane person no well person would have their drapes closed during the day. And so a neighbor might actually knock on your door to say, "Are you okay?" Because you didn't open your drapes today. So there isn't the belong is not a free ride.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to give, and it's kind of interesting with the trajectory, not to harp particularly on the economics, but one figure just how all of these different things are coming together in unforeseen ways is often the case with change. You can't figure out how it's all gonna turn out. But one statistic is just how bad it is for the environment to live alone.
Mm.
Like each person living alone uses the energy of, I think, 1.5 people. So for every two, that's the energy of 3 people.
Mm.
20,000 people is the equivalent of 30,000 people. And that first time is that in the 1960s, it was only 5% of home buyers were individuals.
Mm.
And now it's 21%.
Whoa.
And it's not just happening in the developed world. It's happening in what we would have called the developing world as well. It's just mass shift towards individualism.
Mm.
So, or individual, versus the collective. And then the other thing is just this: the spiritual bypass is real. Don't do it.
Say more about that.
Well, the spiritual bypass is exactly what you're talking about in terms of thinking that meditation is going to solve your
Yeah.
psychological issues.
Yeah.
It's actually it's kind of a bad story, but I used to practice in the Tibetan tradition, and there was a Tibetan Lama who just like, he had a group and it was a retreat, and he's just like, okay, just ask me any question you want. About, rapid fire, AIMA, ask me anything. The treat participants are going, kana, na, na, na. And he just turned and said, in effect, you're not even psychologically well adjusted enough to be in samsara. You don't need to be working on enlightenment right now. You need to be working.
You need to learn how to suffer.
You need to learn how to suffer better, or something to that effect. So, yeah, the Tibetans don't really pull their punches. It's kind of the way they practice and teach. So,
This is sort of related, but not, slightly different strand of something similar. There's a guy named Don, I think it's Don Oakley. And I think he was a student of Adyashanti. So anyway, he's become in the kind of non-dual teacher world. He's like, you see YouTube stuff pop up and things like that. And I saw him, he was explaining how it is that it's related to kind of spiritual bypassing, or this kind of wishful thinking that we have, like we can just meditate our way out of everything. And he was pointing out that like Ramana Maharshi, for example, had, reportedly had this huge awakening experience, but then the only thing he knew what to do was like to go sit in a cave for 17 years. Like he just didn't know what to do with it. Like it's hard to relate to anybody else. Or, he brought up some other teachers where it's like, you don't lose you don't lose your personality, you don't lose your awkwardness. There's still a world that you have to, and like you don't want, just because somebody had some, sort of awakening experience, that doesn't mean they can be your heart surgeon or whatever. Like, there's a whole wide world of things going on that often, like, spiritual teachers are not that well prepared. They might not be the best person to ask the advice from. So a little bit like that. Everybody all right? All right. Seems good.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Thank you again, Mark. You actually touched on everything. It's like there was a little bit of emptiness in there and form. It's like there. So that was really nice. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
And let me see, announcements. Next week will be Rachel Vilsack will be the speaker. And then the following week will be Cato. That will be the Sunday Dharma talk associated with Rohatsu. In that vein, there's Rohatsu happening. It'll start on Monday the 1st through that Sunday the 7th. But, if you're looking for something to do, decompress a little bit between the holidays, where it's opened up to partial participation if you want to come in Thursday. So there's like a long weekend ticket as well if you want to sign up. That will end our retreats for the year. In January, my men's study group what is it entitled? It's entitled something, Zen and the Roman Emperor, Stoicism, Journaling, and Zen. That will run for 3 months. I think it's the first and third Wednesdays of the month. And then we have the winter practice period. So if you want to think about signing up for that, that's 3 weeks. You can attend any combination of those 3 weeks you would like, although the first and the third is weird, but you can do that. We won't stop you. Let's see. And we are currently in our fall appeal. If you feel called to donate, there's a button on the Hokyoji website. This is one of our 2 major fundraisers of the year. To help keeping the lights on and the bells ringing and the Zendo warm in what do we want it? We want it warm in the winter and we want it cool in the summer. And by the way, they have started construction on the new Zendo. So also, if you go to the website, there's a link somewhere. It'll take you to pictures. Right now, it's just a foundation. So that's probably not very exciting. Let's close with the 4 vows. And we will go on our way. Let's see. I always get lost if I try to do them without chanting with others. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. You have a great Sunday. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you.
Thank you so much, Jushin. Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.